Rowoon was sitting on the kitchen shelf, his little legs swinging back and forth as he watched his mother prepare breakfast. He was just 6 years old, his bright eyes filled with excitement as the sweet aroma of pancakes filled the air. His small hands rested on the edge of the counter and he took a deep breath, savoring the delicious scent. Mummy, it smells so yummy. I feel like I can eat them all in one bite. Wine turned her head slightly, a warm smile spreading across her lips as she poured more batter onto the pan. She adored her little boy's enthusiasm. It was the kind of sweetness that made all her exhausting mornings worth it. Oh, really? My little baby thinks he can eat everything, but I wonder what would happen if I ate them all before you. Rowoon's eyes widened in horror, his tiny hands clutching his cheeks dramatically. No, mummy, you wouldn't do that, right? Wine let out a soft chuckle, reaching out to gently pinch his nose. I don't know. These pancakes look so fluffy and delicious. Maybe I should take a bite first and see if they're good enough for my little prince. Rowoon pouted, crossing his arms with a playful frown. Mommy, that's not fair. You made them for me. You have to share. Wine let out a small laugh, flipping the pancake onto a plate before turning to him. Of course, sweetheart. Mommy was just teasing you. You know, I would never eat my baby's favorite pancakes. Rowoon grinned, pleased with her answer. Good, because I love pancakes more than anything. Wine ruffled his hair before placing the plate on the table. Then she gently lifted him off the counter, placing him on his feet. Okay, my little pancake monster, go wear your uniform while I finish making breakfast. By the time you come back, everything will be ready. Rowoon nodded eagerly before dashing out of the kitchen. Wine watched him run, a fond smile lingering on her face, but as soon as he disappeared from sight, her expression changed. The warmth in her eyes faded, replaced by quiet exhaustion. She turned back to the counter, silently preparing not just Rowoon's pancakes but also breakfast for her cold and distant husband, Jungkook. He was a man who rarely spoke to her unless necessary. In front of Rowoon, he tried to act normal, but there were moments when even that facade cracked and his coldness seeped through. Their marriage had never been a happy one. It was built on force, not love. It had been 8 years since their wedding, but Jungkook had never once looked at her like a husband should. He had been in love before, deeply in love. Mira was her name, but she had betrayed him in the worst way possible with his own enemy. After that, Jungkook stopped believing in love. He shut himself off, convinced that all women were gold diggers. There was even a time when he tried to take his own life, but he was catched before he could succeed. His mother, Mrs. Jones, had been forced him to go to America with his father. He stayed there for 2 years, and when he finally returned, his mother had already arranged a marriage proposal for him. At first, he refused. I don't need a wife. Every woman is the same except for you, mom. They only care about money. But Mrs. Jones was persistent, emotionally blackmailing him until he finally agreed. However, he made one thing very clear. Fine, I will marry her, but don't ever expect anything good from me. I won't treat her well, and she will leave me on her own. He had smirked coldly before walking away, and he kept his word. From the moment they got married, he treated Wine with nothing but indifference. She was nothing more than a stranger living in his house. He never let her sleep in his room. So every night she would check on Rowoon, making sure he was asleep before quietly retreating to the guest room. After the marriage, Mrs. Jones once again forced Jungkook to have an heart, using the same emotional tactics. Eventually, Rowoon was born, a beautiful, bright light in Wine's otherwise dark world. Rowoon was everything to her, the only warmth she had in this cold marriage. Jungkook treated Rowoon well, too. in his own way, but Rovon had noticed something. His parents never spoke to each other like normal couples did. Even at this young age, he could sense the distance between them. And once at the table, placing a plate of pancakes for Rovon and a separate breakfast for Jungkook. She took a deep breath. Another day in this loveless marriage had begun. One was about to call Rovon when a familiar, strong scent of cologne filled her nostrils. She stiffened instantly, her grip on the spoon tightening. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He didn't say a word, no greeting, no glance in her direction. He simply walked past her and sat down at the dining table. His movements cold and distant, as always. Before Wine could react, Rovon came running into the kitchen, his small feet pattering against the floor. Mummy, I'm all ready. How do I look? His voice was filled with excitement as he stopped in front of her. His school uniform slightly oversized but still making him look adorable, and his messy hair made him look even cuter. Wine turned toward him, her lips curling into a smile. Let me see. She bent down slightly, pretending to examine him with a serious expression. Then she reached out and pinched his soft cheek. Oh no, who is this handsome little prince in my kitchen? Rovon giggled, covering his face with his tiny hands. Mummy, it's me, your Rovon. Wine laughed softly before lifting him into her lap as she sat down. She grabbed a fork, cutting a piece of pancake before bringing it to his lips. All right, my little prince, time to fill up that tummy before school. Rovon happily took a bite, chewing eagerly. So yummy. Mommy's pancakes are always the best. Jungkook remained silent, sipping his coffee as he stared at his plate. It was a routine morning, wine and Rovon filling the air with warmth while he sat there, untouched by it all. But then Rovon suddenly paused, his small fingers tapping against the table. His eyes flickered between his parents, and his next words made the air in the room grow heavy. Mommy, why do you and Daddy never come to drop me off at school together? Wine's smile froze. Jungkook's fork halted midair. The little boy continued completely unaware of the tension suddenly cracking around him. You know, my friend Minjun, his mommy and dad always come together. They hold his hands and give him goodbye kisses. He says they love him so, so much. His innocent voice was like a dagger to Wine's heart. She swallowed, forcing herself to remain composed. Slowly, she turned her gaze toward Jungkook. He didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he continued eating as if he had not heard anything. Taking a deep breath, Wine shifted her attention back to Rovon, stroking his hair gently. Sweetheart, we will talk about this later, okay? Rovon pouted slightly, looking up at her. But why not now? Wine forced a soft smile and held another piece of pancake to his lips. Because right now, my little prince needs to finish his breakfast, otherwise, he will be late for school. Rovon hesitated but eventually nodded. Taking another bite, Jungkook sat his fork down. His appetite had vanished. As Rovon continued eating, the room fell into silence. Jungkook didn't look up from his plate, and Wine could feel the weight of his presence pressing down on her. She had long learned not to expect anything from him, not a response, not an explanation. Once Rovon finished his pancakes, one wiped his mouth with a napkin and kissed his forehead. Go get your water bottle and check your bag, okay? Mommy will be right there. Okay, mommy. He hopped off her lap, running toward his room with tiny, excited steps. The moment his figure disappeared down the hallway, Wine let out a quiet breath. But before she could move, Jungkook's cool voice broke the silence. You should stop filling his head with useless expectations. His tone was flat, motionless, but the weight of his words sent a sharp ache through her chest. Wine turned to face him, her expression unreadable. And what expectations are those, Jungkook? That his parents should be normal, that he deserves to see his mother and father together, even if just for a few moments in the morning. Jungkook's jaw clenched. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as his dark eyes met hers. He should learn how the world works. Not everything is perfect. Vine let out a bitter chuckle, shaking her head. He is just 6. He shouldn't have to learn that from his own parents. Jungkook didn't respond. Instead, he stood up, grabbing his cup of coffee as he made his way to the living room. It was always like this, conversations that went now here, emotions that were never acknowledged. One watched him leave, the coldness of their marriage settling into her bones once again. A few minutes later, Rowoon came running back, his bag strapped securely on his shoulders. Mummy, I'm ready. Wine quickly composed herself, forcing a smile as she ruffled his hair. That's my good boy. Let's go. Just as she reached for her own bag, she heard Jungkook's voice from the other room. I will drop him off today. Wine blinked, surprised. It wasn't often that Jungkook volunteered to do anything involving Rowoon's daily routine. Rowoon's face lit up with excitement. Really? Daddy, you will take me today? Jungkook finally stepped out, his expression unreadable as he grabbed his car keys. Yeah, let's go before you are late. Rowoon ran to him happily, but Wine simply stood still, watching as Jungkook walked ahead. He had not said a word to her, had not acknowledged her at all. But despite everything, as Rowoon held Jungkook's hand, giggling up at him, Wine couldn't help but feel a small, unfamiliar warmth settle in her heart. Even if Jungkook was cold to her, at least he tried for their son, and for now, that was enough. It had been 2 weeks since Jungkook last dropped Rowoon off at school. Since then, things had returned to their usual cool routine. He was either at work or locked away in his office, barely acknowledging wine unless it was necessary. Tonight was no different. Jungkook sat in the living room, his laptop balanced on his lap as he skimmed through important documents for a high stakes deal he had been working on for the past month. His brows were furrowed in concentration, fingers flipping through pages of the red file beside him. After a while, he felt an urge to use the washroom. With a sigh, he closed the laptop, carefully placing it on the couch along with the file before standing up. Without a second thought, he walked to his bedroom, leaving his work unattended for just a moment. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Wine was busy preparing dinner. The comforting aroma of freshly cooked food filled the air as she stirred the pot. Suddenly, small, hurried footsteps echoed across the floor. Mummy, I want to drink banana milk, he chirped. Wine turned to him with a warm smile, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Okay, my handsome boy, let me make it for you. She walked over to the fridge, taking out the ingredients. Rowoon pulled out a chair and sat on the dining table, swinging his little legs happily as he waited. As Wine blended the banana shake, she remained unaware of the red file sitting dangerously close to Rowoon's hand. She finally poured the shake into a glass and handed it to him. Here you go, baby. Careful, okay? Rowoon grinned, wrapping his small hands around the glass. But before Wine could turn back to her cooking, the sudden sound of a glass clinking harshly against the table made her freeze. A second later, she heard a loud gasp followed by the soft splattering of liquid against the table. Her heart dropped. She turned quickly, her eyes widening in horror as she saw the red file soaked in banana shake. At that exact moment, Jungkook walked into the kitchen. His eyes immediately landed on the disaster in front of him, and within a second, his entire expression darkened. He rushed to the chair, grabbing the damp file with urgency. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, the once crisp documents now moist and sticky. His breathing grew heavier, and before Wine could react, A sharp sting spread across her cheek, her head snapping to the side as she stumbled slightly. Silence filled the room. Rowan's small body flinched at the impact, and within seconds, tears welled up in his big eyes. His lips trembled, and a broken sob escaped him. Mommy, he whispered, his voice shaking as tears rolled down his chubby cheeks. But Jungkook was still fuming, his jaw clenched tightly, his fingers digging into the ruin file as he glared at Wine with eyes filled with rage. Do you even have any idea what you just did? I have been working on this deal for a whole month, and you ruined it in a single second. He roared. One swallowed the sting on her cheek, nothing compared to the ache in her heart. I didn't see it there, Jungkook. It was an accident. She whispered, her voice trembling slightly, but her words only seemed to fuel his anger further. An accident? Do you think accidents fix things? Do you even know how important this was? Do you know how much effort I put into this? His loud voice made Rowan flinch even more. The little boy's sobs grew louder, his tiny hands clutching the fabric of Wine's dress as he trembled. Jungkook ran a frustrated hand through his hair before throwing the ruined file onto the table. I don't even know why I expect anything from you. And with that, he stormed out of the kitchen. Leaving, Wine stood frozen for a moment, her mind reeling, but then a small hiccup pulled her attention downward. Rowoon stood there, his little hands shaking as he rubbed his teary eyes. Mummy, I'm sorry, I accidentally spilled the banana shake on that file. He choked out between hiccups, his voice breaking. Wine's heart clenched painfully. Her own tears slipped down her cheeks as she immediately bent down, pulling him into her arms. It's okay, Mummy's not mad at you. It was just an accident, she soothed, rubbing his back gently. Rowoon clung to her, burying his face in her shoulder as his sobs continued. As she held him tightly, feeling his small body shake against hers, one shut her eyes, willing herself to stay strong. For Rowoon, for the only warmth left in her cold world. That night in Rowoon's room, the little boy clung to Wine with teary eyes, refusing to let go. His small fingers gripped the sleeve of her dress tightly as if afraid she would leave him alone. Mommy, sleep with me today, please, he whispered, his voice still shaky from all the crying earlier. Wine's heart ached at his request. She gently ran her fingers through his soft hair, brushing away the strands sticking to his damp cheeks. But baby, you are a big boy now. You should sleep in your own bed like a brave little prince. No, he pouted, shaking his head. I don't want to be a brave prince today. I just want my mommy. Wine let out a soft sigh, her lips curling into a tender smile. How could she ever say no to him? All right, mommy will sleep with you tonight. As soon as she said those words, Rowoon's face lit up like a little star. He quickly scooted to the side, making space for her on the bed. Vine climbed in, adjusting the blanket toward them before turning to face her son. The moment she did, Rowan instantly wrapped his tiny arms around her, snuggling into her warmth. Mummy, you're so soft, like my teddy bear. He mumbled sleepily, his breath tickling her neck. Vine chuckled softly. And you, my baby, are softer than any teddy bear in the world. Rowan giggled, his little arms tightening around her. But after a moment, his voice turned small and hesitant. Mommy, are you sad? Wine still for a second. She knew Rowan was too young to understand everything, but he wasn't blind to the way Jungkook treated her. He noticed the way his parents barely talked, the way his father looked at her with cold eyes, and how she always smiled at him but never at herself. Blinking away the sting in her eyes, Wine hugged him a little closer. No, baby, Mummy is happy as long as you are with me. Rowan pulled back slightly, looking at her with sleepy yet serious eyes. Then I will always be with you, he declared, his little fingers curling into her dress. Again, I will never leave you, Mummy. Wine felt her heart swell with emotion. She kissed the top of his head, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair, and Mommy will always be with you too, forever and ever. Rovun yawned, nodding his little head. Pinky promised, he mumbled, lifting his tiny pinky, one smile hooking her own pinky around his. Pinky promise, my love. Satisfied, Rovun let out a small hum, his body relaxing against her as sleep slowly took over. One watched as his breathing evened out, his lashes fluttering lightly against his cheeks. She pressed one last kiss to his forehead, whispering a silent prayer in her heart. She might not have a loving husband, but she had Rovun, and as long as he was by her side, she would endure anything. With that thought, she closed her eyes, holding her little boy close as they both drifted into peaceful sleep. The next day, it was Sunday morning, and soft sunlight streamed through the curtains as one sat on the floor with Rovun, helping him with his writing practice. The little boy giggled as he drew random shapes instead of letters, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Mommy, look, this one looks like a dinosaur, he said excitedly, pointing at his scribbled drawing. Wine chuckled, tucking his hair behind his ear. My baby, you were supposed to write letters, not draw dinosaurs. But letters are boring, he whined, pouting cutely. Just as Wine was about to reply, she saw his smile suddenly falter, his small shoulders tensed, and before she could process what was happening, he threw his pencil aside and rushed into her lap, wrapping his tiny arms around her neck. Chubuk had just stepped into the room, his tall frame leaning against the doorway. He had his usual cold expression, but his sharp eyes slightly widened at his son's sudden reaction. Without a word, he walked inside and sat down on the opposite side of the couch, his gaze flickering between Vine and Ramon. The little boy trembled in her arms, clutching her tightly. Hey, what happened, baby? She asked softly, rubbing his back. That will hit me too. Jungkook stiffened. He wasn't expecting those words, wasn't prepared for the way they would feel like a stab straight into his chest. Wine looked up at Jungkook, her expression unreadable. Then she gently pulled Rowoon back to cup his small face in her hands. Why would Dad hit you, my love? She asked softly, her voice gentle as if speaking to a fragile glass. Rowoon's lips trembled. Because he hit you so hard yesterday. Jungkook looked away, unable to meet their eyes. The guilt that had been clawing at him since last night only grew heavier. He had always treated wine coldly, but yesterday he had crossed a line he never should have. He wanted to say something, but words failed him. Before he could react, Wine spoke again. Oh, do you know Daddy apologized this morning? Rovon blinked in confusion, pulling back slightly to look at her. Is that so? One smiled softly, brushing her fingers through his hair. Yes, he said he was really sorry. You know how hard Daddy works for us, right? Yesterday he was just too frustrated, but he would never hit you. The wound Daddy loves you so much. Jungkook swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on Wine. Even after everything, even after all the times he had hurt her, emotionally and not physically, she was still defending him. Rovon pouted again, hugging Wine tightly. I hate him. Jungkook's breath hissed. I hate everyone who hurts my mommy. Silence filled the room. Jungkook sat there frozen. His own son hated him. He looked at Wine, expecting her to scold Rovon, but instead she only held him closer, as if shielding him from everything, maybe even from himself. Baby, let's not hate anyone, okay? Hate is a very heavy thing to carry in your little heart. But she kissed the top of his head. You love mommy, right? Rowan nodded immediately. Then listen to mommy and be a good boy. Don't say such things, okay? Rowan sighed dramatically but nodded again. Fine, but I still don't like him right now. Wine chuckled and ruffled his hair. Okay, okay, now why don't you go to your room and read your storybook? Mommy will come tuck you in for a nap soon. Rovon hesitated before nodding. He gave Wine one last tight hug before hopping off her lap and running towards his room. The moment he left, silence engulfed the space. Jungkook exhaled sharply. His fingers ran through his hair in frustration. Wine remained seated on the floor, not looking at him. After a long pause, Jungkook finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. You told him I apologize. What else was I supposed to say? That his father doesn't care? That his father doesn't know how to love? She asked, her voice laced with exhaustion. Jungkook flinched. He knew she wasn't trying to hurt him, but her words still cut deep. He let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. I didn't mean to hit you. Wine finally looked up at him, her expression blank, but you did. Jungkook clenched his jaw. He had no excuse. After a moment, Wine Siren got up, dusting off her dress. You should go talk to him. What? Rowoon? He is just a child, Jungkook. He shouldn't have to be scared of his own father. Jungkook looked away. I know you don't care about me. I know you regret this marriage. But Rowoon, he is innocent. No matter what happens between us, he should never feel unloved. Jungkook exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. I don't know how to be a father, Wine. Wine stared at him for a long moment before speaking, then learned. With that, she turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving Jungkook alone with his thoughts. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, and it wasn't anger. Jungkook had always been a man of control. He controlled his company, his employees, and even his emotions. But today he felt like he had lost control of himself. He sat alone in his office, staring at the dark screen of his laptop, his mind replaying the events of the past 24 hours. Rowoon, his son, the little boy who once clung to him and looked at him with admiration, was now afraid of him. And Wine, his wife, the woman he had always treated coldly, the one he never acknowledged properly, was the same woman who stood by him, who protected his image even in front of their son. How could she still be so kind? Jungkook ran a frustrated hand through his hair, his heart heavy with guilt. He never cared about her, or at least he told himself he didn't. But then why did it hurt so much to see the redness on her cheek where he had struck her? He never looked after her, never asked if she was okay, yet she always took care of him, ensuring his coffee was made just how he liked it, preparing his things before he even asked, making sure Ruwoon never disturbed him. And what had he done for her? Nothing. No, worse. He hurt her. For the first time in his life, John Jungkook felt like the worst person in the world. A deep sigh left his lips as he got up from his chair, his feet moving on their own. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew one thing: he had to make things right. When Jungkook stepped into the kitchen, he was met with an unusual sight. Rowoon and Wine were standing by the counter, both of them frozen like deer catch in headlights. His sharp eyes immediately catch what they were doing, a steaming bowl of ramen. His jaw clenched slightly. He hated outside food, especially ramen. It was unhealthy, and he had always told Rowoon to avoid eating junk. But instead of feeling irritated, Jungkook found himself amused by the guilty expressions on their faces. Rovon quickly tried to hide the bowl behind his tiny arms. This is not ramen, this is just noodles, he stammered, looking up at Wine for help. Wine burst her lips awkwardly, adjusting the sleeves of her dress. It's just one time, Jungkook. He really wanted to eat it. Jungkook sighed but didn't say a word. Instead, he walked further into the kitchen, his expression unreadable. Rowoon tensed, gripping Wine's dress, but then something unexpected happened. Jungkook exhaled deeply and looked at Wine before lowering his head slightly. I'm sorry, Wine. Blinked, Rowoon blinked. The entire kitchen fell silent. Did John Jungkook just apologize? Ravon's mouth dropped open. He turned to Wine, tugging on her sleeve. Mommy, did the sun rise from the west today? Wine was just so shocked. Jungkook, on the other hand, felt his ears burn. He wasn't used to apologizing, but for the first time, he didn't care about this pride. He looked directly at Wine, his gaze softer than usual. I shouldn't have hit you. Wine looked away, not knowing how to respond. Ravon tilted his head, his tiny lips pouting as he stared at his father. He crossed his arms. Are you really sorry, Dad? Jungkook kneeled down to his son's level, something he had never done before. I am. Ravon looked at Wine, then at Jungkook, then back at Wine. Suddenly, tears welled up in his big round eyes, and he stepped back from Jungkook, shaking his head. No, I don't believe you. He whimpered, rubbing his teary eyes with his small fists. Jungkook stiffened. Rovoni, she whispered, kneeling down to his level. Why don't you believe him? Rovon sniffled, his lips trembling, because if he really loved you, he wouldn't have hit you. Jungkook felt like something stabbed through his chest. Rovon hiccuped, looking away. Daddy never says sorry. He always scolds you. He never smiles at you. Jungkook's throat tightened. He never realized how much his son had noticed. Rovon suddenly turned away and ran out of the kitchen. Sniffling, Jungkook closed his eyes briefly, guilt sinking deeper into his bones. Jungkook sighed and stood up, patting his shoulder gently. He will be okay. Just give him time. Jungkook's fingers curled into fists. Time? Would time be enough to fix all the mistakes he had made? Later that night, Rovon was curled up in his bed, hugging his stuffed bunny. His little face was still pouty, and his eyes were slightly puffy from crying. Wine sat beside him, gently running her fingers through his soft hair. Roni, Rovon turned to look at her. Should we forgive Dad? Rovon hesitated, biting his lip. I think we should. Jungkook, who had been standing quietly by the door, exhaled softly. Rovon sat up and crossed his arms again. But he raised a finger. He has to buy me 3 banana milks as an apology. Jungkook let out a small chuckle and walked inside, sitting at the edge of the bed. 3, that's too much. No, it's a fair deal. Jungkook smiled slightly before ruffling his son's hair. All right, 3 banana milks it is. Jungkook grinned widely before suddenly tackling Jungkook in a tiny hug. For the first time in his life, Jungkook felt something unfamiliar warmth. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally learning what it meant to be a husband and a father.